What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. And today we're going to be taking a look at a hand that I wanted to do during Heads Up Week, but unfortunately didn't have the time to do so. Luckily for me, it's my show, and I get to pick what I want to do, so we are going to check out this Heads Up hand from the end of a 3K World Series of Poker event between Davide Katai and Gordon Vayo.
That you see, the tournament directors that you see, they're all back here tomorrow to work. And it can be very difficult on them if they have to stay till 6, 7 in the morning. I don't think this goes that long, though. You've got to realize that we have 90 big blinds in play. And while we're relatively even right now, when we get up to the 5,100 level, if one player makes a little bit of a run, suddenly the other player is only going to have, say, 20 or 15 big blinds.
Our hand begins with an $80,000 big blind, and Gordon Vayo deciding to limp into the pot with 10-8 off. Now, as you get into the shorter stack sizes, they're about 40 blinds effective here, it becomes a better play to start to develop these calls pre-flop, because you want to see more flops, and if you always raise, you can get jammed on by a wide range of holdings. You want to limp with hands like 10-8 off, because if you face a raise, you can probably call and continue, but if you raised yourself and faced a 3-bet, you'd have to fold. So this hand is a nice hand to mix into that range. Now over to Davide, and he decides to raise up Queen Jack suited, which is certainly standard, definitely a value hand you want to bump it up with. My main problem is the size he chooses to go. He decides to go something like 190,000. I mean, 160 is a min raise. This is like 2.3x over a limp. You want to make the, I guess 2.4x over a limp. You want to make the size a bit bigger because you want to allow your opponent a chance to fold. In fact, when you raise pre-flop, it's a great result for you. If your opponent folds, you immediately win the pot. And by going this size, now on the button, Vayo can continue with anything he decided to call to begin with. In fact, if you think about it from Vayo's perspective, he's going to call another 110,000 to win a pot of 400,000. Those are almost the exact same odds he got to the beginning of the hand. So I like the raise, don't like the size. Would like to see more like 200K, 220K. Something more like 220K looks appropriate to me. Anyway, so Vayo decides to call, and let's take a flop.
So my guess is we will finish this tonight. 9-9-7, 2 hearts. Vayo, open-ended once again. Katai with the overcards. Now we just saw Vayo play 7-8. He was open-ended, out of position, a little bit passively. This time he's in position, and he's got an open-ended straight draw on a paired board.
The flop comes 9-9-7 with a flush draw, and Davide flops absolutely nothing, just 2 overcards to the board, while Vayo does flop an open-ended straight draw. At this point, Katai decides to bet, and I don't hate that play, but I wouldn't mind just seeing a check fold. You want your opponent to have cards like a queen or a jack in their hand, because those hands have to simply just fold the flop. And while it could be okay to bet here with some hands like queen jack suited, your pre-flop range isn't going to have many 9s. In general, those hands aren't going to want to raise. They're probably going to check facing a limp. Now, you can have some 9s, ace-9 suited, king-9 suited, 10-9 suited, but it's not as likely, and while you can have overpairs, this board is a bit more favorable for the small blind. Now, he does decide to bet, and the action's over to Vayo with 10-8, and he has 2 reasonable options. Calling is okay, but I'm going to have to say I lean towards raising. When you have 10-8, the chance your opponent has a hand like 10-9 suited or 9-8 suited goes down a bunch, so that's good for you. And then also if your opponent's bluffing with a hand like queen jack, you get them off the hand right there. You want to have some raises on these paired boards, and while it is good to trap some 9s and play most of your continuing range as a call, you want to have some hands raise it up so that you can put your opponent in tough spots with hands like queen jack, and also when you do have a 9, you can get some value. The real thing that I think is important to note from this flop decision is you have to have some 9s call and some 9s raise. If you don't do both things, you're going to have problems in your game. Alright, so Vayo does decide to call, which is still okay, just on the conservative side. Classic Vayo. Let's take a turn.
Turn card is the Ace of Diamonds.
Katai looks like he's going to double barrel this.
And that's 140,000.
140,000 into 450. The winner of this pot will be our chip leader. Vayo just calling in position once again.
The turn comes an offsuit ace, creating 2 flush draws, and I think that turn is very interesting. Pre-flop ranges matter a lot when we think about who has what kinds of aces. For starters, if Vayo had a good ace or a middling good ace, he's likely going to raise up on the button, or maybe a suited ace, likely going to raise those hands up on the button, so he doesn't have too many aces in that pre-flop limp range. However, if he did limp an ace like ace 3 off or ace 6 off, which could be some reasonable hands to limp in with, he's almost always going to be calling a raise, so he does have some aces that call pre, and those will always call the very small flop bet. On the other side, Katai definitely will have strong aces like ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack, and while I'd probably argue to check a good portion of those on the flop, because he bets so small, it's a little more likely that he has all of those hands in his range, basically betting the flop because in general his range is stronger and the small blind mainly misses the flop. So this turn is very interesting, and at this point I think it makes sense to do a couple things in the big blind. You could take an approach, and in general I'd advocate for an approach where you go a conservative bet style, only betting a few kinds of hands, some of your strongest aces, maybe some of your nines, and also some of your draws, and then also checking with a bunch of hands. If you don't check a hand like an occasional ace or queens or a 7 if you bet the flop, then when you do check, you're going to be way too weak. So at this point, I don't really like Queen Jack suit as a double barrel. You don't block anything. You have no outs if he has an ace or a 9. I don't really understand why Katai decides to fire the turn. And I also don't really like the size that much either. We're looking at a very small turn bet, only around a third pot. I think all in all, this play is just pretty bad. Now over to Vayo, and he has another opportunity to raise or call. Now, in general, on the paired boards, I think it makes more sense to raise on flop or river. If you do trap the flop, usually trapping the turn is a decent play. Also, you're going to have a bunch of weaker hands you want to get to the river with, so I'm behind a call here on the turn, but it's important to note you could have a small range of hands raised here as well. All right, so we have a bet in the turn, we have a call in position. Let's play some poker.
Regards the 5 of clubs.
Katai gives up. Queen high still the best hand though. Vayo's got a bet. Now the way this played out, Katai bet the flop, Vayo called. Katai double barreled, Vayo called. Now Vayo certainly wouldn't bet a 7. He would bet an ace though, and he definitely would bet a 9.
The river comes in offsuit 5, which is pretty much a brick, although 8-6 suited does get there. Now Katai has an interesting decision to make. While I'm not a big fan of the way he played his hand the flop and turn, particularly the turn, his hand does make an interesting river triple barrel. He doesn't have a heart, which is good. He doesn't have a diamond, which is good. And he doesn't have a 10, so his opponent's more likely to have a hand like 10-8 or Jack-10 or straight draw plus flush draw kinds of hands. So all in all, his removal effects in the river make it a reasonable triple barrel. However, he does decide to check, so I'm not too fond of this decision if you're going to play it on the flop and turn like that. I think you got to fire that third barrel and put them in a tough spot with a hand like king high or a 7 or a brick draw. Now over to Vayo, and he has a crystal clear decision to make. He has one of his worst hands in his range, his opponent has bet twice and has checked over to him. It's time to fire a bullet out there, make it a big bet, and put his opponent into a tough decision with a lot of marginal hands. The thing is, though, Vayo doesn't have exactly a long and prestigious history here on the channel. Can he find the right move here on the river?
So it's 320,000.
Gordon, that's 300.
And I like the bet. I mean, I think it's consistent with having an ace in your hand. But we've seen Katai make one hero call with queen high already. Can he make another?
So Vayo does decide to fire out the river, but his size I'm not a massive fan of. I think what he's trying to do is say that he could have an ace, which certainly could bet the size, but in general you probably want to bet a little bigger with an ace, and if you had a 9 you definitely want to bomb it, so you should be doing a bit of these bigger sizes. It could be okay to have some small sizes in there, but remember at the end of the day, the bigger you bet, the more you get to bluff, so you probably want to pick something more in the vicinity of 500-600k and put your opponent in a tough spot. Now back over to Katai, and his hand interestingly becomes a reasonable hand to consider calling with. For all of the characteristics that we said originally it could be a barrel, it now has a reasonable chance to call. If we think about it, his hand doesn't block any of the missed draws that are important, like 10-8 or Jack-10 or any of the flush draws, and those are going to be the main hands looking to bluff. So while it doesn't block any good hands, it also doesn't block any bad hands, and his opponent definitely is going to bluff with a lot of these missed draws. It also kind of comes down to how you think your opponent's playing these draws earlier in the match. If you're seeing a lot of flatting and looking to play on later streets, then all of a sudden your opponent likely is going to have a big chunk of bluffs. However, this is really one of your worst hands in terms of absolute strength, and it's obviously a lot better to just have a pair and actually block something. So what do you think Katai is going to do facing this river decision?
Vayo bets 320,000. Katai getting just under 4-1. And he can beat a 10-8 draw. 8-6 got there, by the way. Hearts did not get there. He's going to make the call. And he calls again with queen high, and again he's good.
I think we all know what Katai is thinking right now. Wait, no. Vayo. Oh. That makes a lot more sense. Before I go, I do want to say quickly that I appreciate all you guys showing up to watch the videos. This channel has grown so much in 8 months, and I'm excited for the future. So if you want to be part of that, hit the subscribe button and join the team.